Violent behavior is something we hear a lot about in the news very often, and one of the most common, unfortunately, seems to be mass shootings. And it's not just the ones that happen on the street, but ones that will frequently get clicks, the ones that happen in schools and committed by typically younger men. And many people try to find explanations for this kind of behavior, and one of the more popular ones seems to be the hobby of playing violent video games. Many of these shooters tend to fall between the upper class high school students and college student ages, most of which being around 16 to 21. This also happens to be the similar age to those who play violent video games, which has generally caused others to make the connection between the two. As someone who is in the same age range and has played these kinds of games for years now, I thought I could provide an interesting perspective. I was going to explain why that playing violent video games does not lead to violent behavior and what to do by bringing up these three specific points. Point one is correlation versus causation and how that applies to video games. Point two, how small acts of aggression over time can lead to more aggressive behavior in the future, if that's true. And then point three being how exposure to violent acts in media affects people's view on violent action in real life and how they respond to it. So going back to point one, a bit of information found regarding the correlation between playing violent video games and violent behavior is that there was indeed a slight correlation among studies with the two. What many people misinterpret about these findings, though, is the fact that even though there can be correlations found in certain cases, they fail to consider the far larger amount of people who play these games that end up never committing any kind of violent acts in their life. My point being that correlation does not always mean causation, and that in this case, there have been not enough correlating cases to be considered a significant cause for violent behavior. Moving on to point two, a common argument for this topic is how small exposure and feelings of aggression can build up over time and lead to more extreme real life behavior. I mean this by saying that if a player ends each game feeling slightly more aggressive than before, it will naturally build up to real life aggression. However, numerous studies have shown this not to be the case, and in some scenarios actually have the reverse effect. Aggressive feelings people may have simply do not build up over time, as some people have tried to point out before. The studies will continually find that long-term impacts of violent video games on youth aggressiveness are nearly zero. And then my third point, we have the argument surrounding violent video games' effects on wider emotional behavior. There are those who believe that continual exposure to violent acts in media will lead them to want to seek out this kind of behavior in the real world or want to recreate it in some way. However, there's not been any new kind of phenomenon. There's actually been a new kind of phenomenon found when researching this concept. The University of South Wales back in 2018 actually found that those exposed to violence in media were less distracted by violent imagery in other contexts and less likely to recreate them. And what they called it was emotion-induced blindness. So ultimately, with all this kind of research that has been done, it seems generally pretty clear that there's not a significant enough correlation between people who play violent video games and commit real life acts of violence. This can be shown in the general lack of significant correlation between the two, the disproven claim about how small thoughts of aggression can build up over time, and the phenomenon of emotion-induced blindness for those who play violent video games typically will experience. And I think really ending it off, I think it's important to realize other factors that may be more systematic